series is organized by the Conflict and Disasters branch at UNEP that has over 25 years of experience in managing projects in the context of crisis. With the training series, we want to share lessons learned and experiences that our staff has made while managing projects in volatile situations. Because one thing is sure, there will always be crises, and in regard to accelerating global climate warming, rather more than less. So for an effective project management, it is important to be prepared and to also be able to respond adequately to disasters of all kinds and also conflicts, be they human-induced or triggered by natural hazards. This session will cover the project implementation phase. After, in the first session of our training series, we covered the project planning phase. And in 2 weeks, the series will close with a session on project monitoring and evaluation. If you haven't had the chance to join us for the session, for the first session, you can access the session as well as the slides of the session via the link that my colleague will post in a second in the chat. So for today, we invited again 2 experts. Firstly, Joe Attwood. He will speak about the theoretical basis of project implementation, followed by a presentation by Fabien Monteil, who will illustrate with his professional experience challenges that occur during project implementation. We will end the session then, as I already mentioned, with a Q&A session, and you can put, as also already mentioned, your questions in the chat throughout the training. Our first speaker will be Joe Attwood. He is an environmental expert with over 25 years of experience delivering environmental impact assessment services across a range of industrial sectors in many parts of the world. And he has worked with the private sector as well as with the United Nations, and is accustomed to deliver assessments to the World Bank as well as IFC, often in challenging settings. And he is an expert in practicing both quantitative and qualitative risk assessment techniques in order to assess toxicological risk to environmental receptors, including human health. And over the past 8 years, he has been commissioned to review, assess, and then deliver on resource reduction strategies for clients ranging from big international organizations to UK airports. And with that, in a focus of waste, water, and energy. Yeah, many thanks, Joe, for being here with us. And without further ado, I give you the floor, and you can share your screen.
Great, thank you very much, Eike. I won't share my video, I'll just share my screen, but a very big welcome to everybody. And as Eike says, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, as it applies to you all. Just going to jump into my shared screen to get the PowerPoint started. So just to build on what Eike was saying there, can you just, Eike, just confirm you can see that?
I can't see it yet. Now, yes, we can see it.
Can, good. So just to build on what Eike was saying from my background, I've been working with the UN for a number of years as assessing impact in conflict and fragile states. So what we're looking at is an implementation of project management as it relates to both conflict and fragile states, but also taking into account the variations that occur in projects. So it's not just about in crisis, but there's also how we look at projects as a whole. So the first slide here is really important because the first line of why should we care, it's relevant across many applications. And for those of you who sat through the previous presentations that were a couple of weeks ago, there is an invariable overlap about what I'm going to say and what was said there, because a lot of this is about how we look at projects and project planning and the theory, less so the theory, I don't like the word theory, but the sort of practical applications of what is expected. There isn't a great body of work out there that looks at project management in emergencies and conflict settings or even emergency settings, because there's a reliance on an understanding of the basic concepts of what project management is. Once you have those basic concepts, then it becomes just a bit of changing, a bit of sort of thinking about how you can adapt them to emergency situations. I don't think there's a very pressing need for everybody to go out and get a project management qualification or some sort of training accreditation, but it does help in understanding the terminology, because there is a very specific set of terminology that applies itself to project management. I'm going to try and keep most of that to a minimum. And this is about my experiences, and following my presentation, Fabien's experiences. Fabien, much more than me, I'm trying to just give you an introduction about what it is you want to build on so that you're ready for the emergency. So why do we need to care? This slide is any of you who are related teachers or have done teaching in the past, you always start a presentation with numbers, and it just gets the interest going because it's like a little test. This is a test with a very sad sort of result to it. So the numbers reflect what we're talking about today, about why should we care. So there's 40 wars being undertaken or carried out or executed in 2021, 3 of which are major conflicts, which means there are 10,000 or more deaths, battle-related deaths. So that's 40 wars in 2021. There are 401 natural disasters in 2021. So that's a significant amount. And natural disasters vary in context and vary in intensity, but the logging of that excessive number means that we are in a place, as Ike pointed out, that climate change is creating much more of a crisis for us in terms of the responses needed. 15,000 is people dead from natural disasters in 2020. There isn't a number for 2021. So 15,000 people died from those 400 or so natural disasters. And then 82.4 million is the number of refugees present in the world as of 2021. That number clearly has gone up recently. So 82.4 million refugees. Now, this is important because that creates the context about which projects are delivered. Projects in emergency, as I said, projects can exist across every sector and do exist across every sector, but they're all being delivered. And when a crisis hits, it changes the dynamic of that delivery. On top of those numbers, we have three visuals as well. And these, I do apologize, these are the only visuals that I've got in my presentation, because project management doesn't really carry a heavy weight of visual sort of substance. It does with Fabien's maybe, but less so with mine. So on the left, we have the flag of Ukraine. On the right, Afghanistan pre-Taliban, and the middle is COVID. And as we know, these are presenting a specific set of complexities, and they're different sets of complexities. So the Ukrainian is a rapid onset conflict with significant impact to the projects being delivered in those conflict areas. Afghanistan is a slowly developing crisis. Arguably, it could have been foreseen in a landlocked country that presents significant challenges in response to how projects can be delivered. And then COVID is this, as you all know, is this international pandemic that has created challenges in as much as it's prevented people from undergoing their day-to-day business, notwithstanding the health impacts. So with the Ukraine, you know, I was talking about the Ukraine, that the number is 1 million, it's gone up to 3 million. That's in a period of 2 weeks. So it's a significant impact on what we're trying to deliver in projects. Now, this is the fun bit. So in the training, we all go on training courses, and we all sit there, we wonder whether we'd ever take any of it away with us. And in the many, many years I've been doing this type of work and sat through hundreds of training courses on project delivery and what we need to know, there's only two aspects I've managed to take away and that are lodged in my head. And I'm going to urge you to try and take these 2 away with you. So the first one is the word assume, and the second one is the 6 Ps. Some of you may already know this. Assume is broken down in
Sorry, I think we lost Joe. Joe, are you still here?
We lost the sound.
Yes.
Can't hear anything.
Let's wait 2 minutes. I guess he has problems with his connection. So we wait 2 more minutes. I hope he's back. Otherwise, yeah, we have to see what we can do. Yeah, I saw in the chat that someone asked if this session is certified. Yes, it is. If you have filled in the pre-survey that we send in advance to this session, and also if you fill in the post-survey to this session, and then we will send out certificates of attendance next week. So Joe is back. Here we are. Hello, Joe. You're muted.
Just tell me where I got to then.
At the ace, I think. Like the slide with the ace
with
and
arrows.
Then yes.
Okay, let me just share my screen again. Are we on? Can you see this?
Yes, we were at assumes, and I think you were about to start with this.
All right, good. So the takeaway on this then is that there are two pieces of information from trainings that I've managed to lodge into my head, and this is the sorry, I've got these screens up now. So the assume is make an ass of you and me. So an ass, for those of non-English speakers, is really a fool. So it makes a fool. If you assume that something's going to happen and it doesn't, it's not necessarily the responsibility of the person that you assumed was going to do it. It's your responsibility. The 6 Ps is prior planning and preparation prevents poor performance, which it derives from this issue of understanding what you need to do before an event occurs. And the anecdote there is, for those of you that have children, if you're planning a trip and you don't prepare for it, it generally goes wrong. So those two are the 2 takeaways that I'd like you to lift from this presentation and just slot into your repertoire of activities when doing project management. So project management, this is where we get into the practical, the theory side of it. The definition there, the role of the project manager is to plan, organize, staff, evaluate, direct, control, and lead the project from concept to completion. And the project manager is responsible for the project what and when. Now, if you look down the list on box on the right, what we're looking at are well as those that you would expect. So assigning tasks and roles, yes, of course you would. Evaluating and looking at risks, that's obvious. And then you move down into motivating and coordinating. It's like, well, they're soft skills. How can you do that? And it's true that a project manager is expected to have that level of understanding of what each person is doing and how to coordinate that person. And then the more practical side of it is to understand that the project is running on time and budget and dealing with the changes to the project. So the project manager is responsible for all of those aspects. And you can effectively wrap all of these up, and this probably came out in the presentation previously, in the project plan. So the project plan, which acts as a central repository for project management related activities. When you're creating a project, whatever its size is, and when I put this list together on the left, these bullet points, I'm trying to look at the types of projects that you as the audience could be interested in. So you need to have at least 4 or 5 of these are mandatory. So the proposals have to be mandatory, budget plans have to be mandatory, risk assessments have to be mandatory, monitoring evaluation for a framework, how do you monitor success, has to be mandatory. And then these other ones, the quality plans, organizational charts, the progress reports is more about flow of information, communication plans are less mandatory in terms of the actual product that or the output that you're going to put into the project plan, but they help inform the project, and they help us to understand where the project weaknesses are should and when the crisis hits. So I would expect, and again, take this away as you will, but I expect you to be looking at your projects and saying, have I got all of these things? And if not, do I need to get them? I'm going to just draw your attention quickly there to the vulnerability and sensitivities assessments, because that really relates to those projects that have an impact on communities. So we're looking at where are the sensitive parts of those communities, or projects that have a component which could be regarded as more sensitive than other components. And some projects don't have it. Building projects, possibly, you could argue, are less relevant. So the PM will use judgment aided by tools to assess the project to project delivery. And these items on the left, these bullet pointed items, relate to the flow of information that allows the project manager to understand exactly where the project is. So the work performance reports come in from everywhere. With meetings, they're all minuted. Escalation process, this is the process by which
Okay, Joe, we lost you again. Can you still hear us?
the project delivery, and many.
Okay, no, he dropped. No, Joe, there you are. You were frozen for a few seconds. And now you're muted.
Okay, I'm just going to share again.
Now we can hear you again. Or maybe, do you think it's easier if we share the screens for you then?
And I just say move on.
Okay, okay.
Do you want to do that? Just you square this share.
Just if it's because of the connection, but yeah, you can also.
I'll stop sharing. You share from your end and just go to the slide.
Matheus, would you like to share? Perfect. I think, yeah, maybe that will be easier with the connection. The other slide said, oh no, perfect. Yeah, there. Perfect. Thank you, Matheus.
So go down. Go down. Go down. So there we're there, risk mapping exercise. So what I was saying there realistically is that the project manager is the repository of all information. The project manager is the person who knows what's going on, when, and who's doing what. And they can't express this to you this enough, that the project manager must not be indispensable. So when the project manager leaves, which project managers do, they don't take away all of that knowledge with them. It has to be recorded so that another PM can go in, a PM being a project manager can go in and pick it up. Without that, you're in a very, very dangerous place of the project failing. The risks and emergencies needs its own slide, because the risk mapping exercise, from my point of view, is absolutely the framework, the only framework that allows you to begin to undertake the 6 Ps, which is the prior preparation piece: planning, preventing poor performance. So the risk mapping exercise, the risk can be defined as an uncertain event or set of events which, should it occur, will have an effect on the achievement of the objectives. And a risk is measured by probability and magnitude. And that's from a government document here in the UK. Then emergency preparedness and response plan is an event that so you're looking at the event that creates an immediate risk, which is defined as an emergency. There are many emergency response plans, organizational response plans, that are not risk exercises, and they have their own relevance. But for what we're talking about today, I would urge you to look at risk mapping. The reason for these is, as I say in the box, is to allow for the collaborative collaborative development of mitigation measures. Next slide, please. So this, you don't need to read it, but this is an example of a risk assessment that was done for a project which is bringing renewable energy to refugees. And then number 2, adverse national government regulations. So they're looking at risks that are real. So they're not risks that are sort of artificial, but they're risks that you can manage and mitigate. If the risk is too high, then that part of the project needs to be reviewed, because it's likely that if the risk is activated, that there'll be a breakdown in the project. And then we just got the mitigating features, which is something that you sit down and collaboratively discuss with your colleagues about how to mitigate. Next slide, please. So before the crisis, the preparation. So this is the 6 Ps kicking in. So I'd want you to look at the sensitivity of core project. Look at the sensitivity of core project requirements. So the stakeholder rate, who do you want to talk to? The communications, how are you going to talk to them?
No voice.
Sorry, Joe, we can't hear you anymore. And yeah, a little reminder, please keep your microphone and also your camera off during the whole session, because we're just too many people in this virtual room. Okay, I think we lost Joe again. I'm really sorry for that. I hope he'll be back soon. And again, also a reminder, you can put your questions in the chat so that we can consider them in the end of the session in the Q&A. And as the last time, we will also share the slides with all participants after the session, as well as the recordings of the session.
Hello, everyone. This is Paula from the project management on disaster management. I think we can't get Joe back. So my suggestion is we move forward with Fabien, and then when Joe comes back, he can continue his presentation or add anything in the Q&A. That must be the easier way.
Okay, to not lose the time.
Yeah, so I suggest that we move on, and then in the Q&A, he can come back and add anything he wants to add.
Okay, then let's move on to Fabien. I'm going to introduce you shortly. Fabien Monteil is a country representative and head of program at the United Nations Environment Program based in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. For the last 13 years, he has been in various positions with the United Nations and the World Bank. And before becoming a country representative in Haiti in 2019, he worked in Kinshasa, DRC, and in Hanoi, Vietnam, as well as and was based as regional advisor for Africa in Nairobi. Moreover, Fabien can draw from 8 years of consulting experience in finance, organization, management, and strategy at Eurogroup in France and Madagascar. And Fabien has a PhD certificate in international relations, diplomacy, and climate change. And he also holds a master's degree in business management, as well as in European business from EDEC. So I'll give you the floor, Fabien. I hope the connection works fine, and we can go smoothly through your presentation.
Yes, good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you. Just checking briefly that you hear me and possibly you see me.
Yes. Very clearly.
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, fantastic. So greetings from Port-au-Prince, and let's hope the internet connection from Haiti is stable enough. So yeah, it's really my pleasure. Maybe let's move on. I'm going to take you to a brief journey into the reality of project management in a context like Haiti, which is obviously quite demanding and full of surprises and disruptions. So let's maybe move on with the type of situation that I've basically been facing in the last few years here. Can we get the next slide, please? Yes. So the first type of situation that I mean you might encounter in your own side is social political crisis, and also linked to economic crisis sometimes. So this has basically happened since I arrived in Haiti. So since September 2019, I must say we've been navigating through social political crisis with different levels of intensity. But that's basically that has been a kind of common disruption. So what's happening in Haiti? Basically, you have a combination of trends and events with deep disruptive impacts on activities. So here I've been listing quite a few. Actually, one of them is a violent demonstration, road blockades because of the social political crisis. So people demonstrating against political blockage, etc. Sometimes it can get violence. You get road blockades. When you got road blockades around the airport, well, that means that basically the airport and the airspace of the country is closed. You can't get out and get in of the country. And that leads to country lockdowns that sometimes can last several weeks. Meaning again that people can't flow, goods can't flow in and out. And usually it's as simple as you can't get to the office, you can get to the shopping mall, you can't buy water and fruits and etc. So that's the kind of things that you might experience from time to time. Surging criminality, kidnappings, shootings, gangs war. You got very serious events of kind of mass migrations within the country. And this is something that we often forget to talk about when we talk about migrations. I mean, usually the headlines are more focusing on cross-border migrations, but not so much on internal migrations, which can be extremely disruptive socio-economically as well as politically, and associated with many human rights abuses of any kind. We're in a situation in Haiti where we got delayed elections, so we got a vacuum of institutions. There is basically no parliament working for more than 2 years now. Most of the mayors are not elected anymore, etc. This ended up with president's assassination, kind of culminated with president assassination in July 2021, and a total constitutional vacuum. So here you can imagine you got kind of fight between political factions within the country, but you have basically no constitutional clarity on how to take the situation forward. So this is the best possible place to make sure that you really stay into this kind of continuous crisis, and it is extremely difficult to handle. And this obviously in a situation that also has economic dimension and economic implications like inflation, And we've also experienced food shortages. Food shortages can be pretty massive. In Haiti, we got some periods where you got basically no access to fuel for 2 to 3 weeks. And this leads to situation where in countries like Haiti, for example, the implications are very severe, including closing of hospital because you just don't have the electricity to carry out any forms of operations. It's also disturbing on the water supply for cities. So, for example, we got parts of Port-au-Prince capital where the pumping system for supplying inhabitants with water was not functioning. So it leads to very, very serious disruptions, and you got everyone back to how do you secure your basic needs. So how to carry out a project and work with your project in these situations. In the blue box there, I just trying to draw on a few implications. Of course, this is not comprehensive. I just want to highlight a few of them. The first point that we always have to keep in mind as really very central aspect is the personal security and the personal aspect of the crisis. So of course we experience crisis as an organization, as a project, but we also experience them first and foremost as a person. And this works as well for the people of our team. This works for our beneficiaries and partners, etc. One important instrument for that is a business continuity plan. So it's basically telling, it's a plan that looks at different levels of emergency. So you'd say basically in our plants in Haiti, we have, I would say, a normal situation, and we have 2 levels of emergency. The last level is basically when all foreign staff has to relocate outside the country, and we basically tend to stop operations. And actually what we managed to do in the context of Haiti and in the specific context of the type of activities that we carry out is to find a way to actually maintain our activities while ensuring all these aspects of security, etc. So this is designed within this business continuity plan. One of the decisions, for example, that we took was to equip all our staff with the necessary capacities to work from home, including we provided solar panels to everyone, double internet solutions, double telecommunication solution, obviously computers and so on. So to make sure that when we're in a situation where we can't go to the office, and when it becomes quite systematic that people cannot go to the office, then you try to keep a kind of way of working, as long as obviously there is no shooting too much around, and there's no gang war entering your district. This is important because just a practical illustration, what happened when I arrived is we got into a situation where every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, you got the UN security that was releasing a report on the situation of the day, and where we were deciding around 6 or 6:30 in the morning every morning if we were going to the office or not. And basically, we were then reassessing the situation. So you could go to the office, decide it at 7 a.m., go to the office, and have to go back to your place around 11 or 12, sometime later on in the day. Because of, depending on how the situation would be evolving in the streets. This is not sustainable. And so when you enter a situation where disruption start to become the norm, you have to find a continuity, a way of ensuring continuity, and a way of ensuring that your staff and your partners keeps working in a rather secure way. And this obviously has psychological implications as well. So this business continuity plan is one instrument. Contingency plan is also an instrument. Here I want to flag the fact that when a contingency plan is established, usually it's established when there is no emergency yet. And you always find out that there's some there's some assumptions and some scenario in this plan that actually doesn't work in reality. And here, for example, one of the bad surprise that I got with this contingency plan is when we started to activate it, we realized that some aspects were not working. For example, we had an office on the field, and the evacuation of the staff on the field was actually logistically going through a very single bridge, connecting two cities. And that bridge was necessary to cross if we want to reach the place where we could get the helicopter to come and pick up the personnel. And actually, obviously, crossing a bridge is something extremely risky and vulnerable when you got everyone in the street with very violent demonstrations. And basically, you don't want to be on the middle of the bridge at this point. So basically, we ended up having a contingency plan on the way to evacuate our personnel on the field that was simply not working. So this is the type of thing then, you have to find solution on the last minute, discuss with, for example, the UNAS who managing the helicopter to try to find a place on the other side of the river so that they can go and pick up the staff, etc. So this is also something to keep in mind. Even if you have the best plan, in this case was not the best contingency plan, but if you have things planned on paper, in reality, you always found out there are things to fine tune, and basically that's part of the work. So team management and psychological health, I talked about that. That's very important. We ended up at some point, we spent quite a few months, and particularly when COVID added to that, we spent a few months where basically I had no eye contact, no visual contact with some people of my team, and this is complicated to handle. And here is, for example, something, again, a bad surprise and an important experience that I made, personal experiences. I thought everything was going fine on the personal and psychological health until I eventually met with one of my staff that I didn't see for 6 months, in person. And when we met, I realized that this person was slightly overweight before we met, was almost anorexic. And here I was shocked. And basically the lesson I took from, so of course then we discussed, and then I realized that this has been extremely tense and extremely traumatic for this person, including because of the crisis that was going on around this person, and the life with the impacts on her family, on her kids, and so on. And this has been extremely difficult for this person to live at. And I realized that actually I didn't really properly do my job on that things, and I didn't see that coming. And here is, when you are in contact through, Teams or Skype or Zoom or whatever, you don't necessarily always, get the full picture of what's really happening for the people. And you have to be much more careful than just, how are you doing? Yes, I'm fine. And okay, let's move on. Okay. And that's something also that is part of managing crisis. And it's an important lesson for me. You got aspects of partner security. This is something that we need to. I need to explain a little bit. In Haiti, our work as UNEP is mainly through implementation through partners. So, for example, we do a lot of work of restoring ecosystem, supporting communities with sustainable livelihoods, and aspects of governance, etc. But for a lot of this work, we don't have UNEP staff on the field, planting trees, etc. Of course, we work through local partners, so organizations of farmers, women cooperatives, and this type of things. Okay, and this is important. It has proved to be an extremely important factor of resilience for our projects, because basically when the country is locked, people on the ground, they still need to wake up in the morning and eke up their living. And so they need to work, they need to do their activities, they need to earn money, they need to buy food and water to support their families. So when the situation looks like you would be locked in your apartment and you have your provisions and your security, people on the field live a different situation. And when these people are empowered through your projects, they're empowered with the means to do their activity, these activities continue. So this is extremely important. However, you have a duty of care. So basically, when you have a high risk of kidnapping, for example, or shooting, you have to make sure that the people who keep on the ground working for you, basically, for themselves, but basically for you, and keep implementing your project, these people, you also share duty of care for them. So you need to make sure that here you will communicate, you will ensure oversight, you will provide some additional security means to help them go through this situation. So I quickly talked about the model of operation and partnerships, local footprints. This is extremely important, particularly for an organization like UNEP. So if you work for an organization like, let's say, WFP or NGOs, like, who are used to emergencies, basically model is about handling emergency, you're in a different situation. UNEP is not tailored to handle this type of emergency. And so we don't have an administration and logistical and financial capacity to be totally responsive to this type of thing. So it's extremely important for us to keep a local footprint, quite low, and to work through these partnerships, including and first and foremost with local organization. Here, for example, we happen to have different types of partnerships, including with some donors. We work through international organization. One of the key conclusions of that is we find it out that when we implement activities on the ground through local partners, this proved to be much more resilient than through international partners. Again, for the reason I mentioned before. A last point here I wanted to raise is also an opportunity to raise awareness on nature-based solutions, and this is something that we've experienced. So the logic here is quite, seems a bit obvious, but I want to share that because I think it's important. Even in the worst crisis, you might always find some opportunities to build on that. Here, an important thing is this situation of socio-political crisis led to a lot of disruptions in supply chain at national level, from one region to the other, etc. So a lot of tension on supplying regions with food and water and all sorts of goods. This actually increased the people awareness on how far they can depend on what the nature can provide at the local level. And this is a very important thing for us. And this can be also turned into our advantage when we try to promote nature-based solutions. One of the big debates you have in a situation like Haiti, which is again one of the least developed countries, extremely vulnerable to many shocks, is basically how you need to work towards a model where you don't necessarily depend only and not too directly on international support or supply chains, etc. But you need to find more endogenous ways of building your resilience and building your development. So nature-based solutions are extremely important for that, and we've been promoting that because basically in a situation where it gets really difficult to get supply from outside on very basic needs, then basically you turn to nature for the better and for the worse, including when basically you just go and chop down the last remaining pieces of woods and forests that you have, because that's the only way you can make your living. So this can be for worse, but it can also be for the good, and including bringing people to investing more into their environmental assets to provide services. Next, I will move a bit faster on the other two situations that I wanted to raise. So the second one is COVID-19. COVID-19 was actually had quite limited impact in Haiti, I would say, generally speaking, we had our first case of COVID that appeared in the country in May only, so quite a few months after a lot of other countries. There have been very limited protective measures, including for the bad reasons, like, well, there was no mask, and every people basically live, I mean, most people live on a day-to-day basis, so if they don't go to the market to sell their fruits or to buy, etc., well, they don't eat and they don't feed their family, so they had to continue. So, questions of protective measures like keep your distance, etc., in a very lively markets where you got thousands of people and no mask, it's a bit difficult. Anyways, there was also an important aspect. There was very low fatality actually in Haiti, linked for many reasons that we don't have necessarily a scientific paper on that, but this is what happened. So in general, we didn't experience this massive waves of fatality and etc. Linked to COVID-19 in Haiti. As I mentioned, we have a type of project that we run is actually more about assistance and advisory projects with some field level components that are actually carried out by implementing partners. And for this type of projects, the implications of COVID have been pretty limited. So the things that we've done is actually, the first thing is to review impacts and reassess the risk at a strategic level. So here we carried out a household survey to try to assess what was the kind of move, a more kind of strategic move that was happening because of the COVID. Let me give you an illustration. What we find out is for the first few weeks of the COVID, a lot of people got scared and basically stayed at home. It has an implication on the way farmers, for example, have been working on their field, because they lost quite a few days of work in the field. This had a consequence that there was lower time to invest into, for example, taking out the wild herbs and maintaining the field out of pests or this kind of things. One of the consequences of that is, as soon as people started getting back to their field, there was an increase in the use of pesticides and chemicals to try to compensate for the loss of time that they spend in the field, and this can lead to increased pollutions. So this is what I mentioned by strategic level of risk. So it's a move in terms of, would people get more into forest to cut wood, for example. This is something that we observed as a consequence of COVID-19. So you have increased risk and pressure on your natural assets locally and this type of thing. So this was basically assessed and carried out through this household survey. And this is about looking more at the strategic risk. So where are you going to have increased risk and pressures in terms of the overall outcomes you're trying to reach, increasing the environmental improving restoration, improving the situation or environment and livelihoods of people. Then you have a second level which is more project-wide, related to your actions. So what are the impact there? And here we carried out consultations with beneficiaries to also assess what you're doing, what we're supporting you to do through this project. Is that really what is necessary for you at this point? And here we got very positive feedback, because basically supporting beneficiaries, so women, men, youth, farmers, etc., in their activities to increase their livelihood, to restore the ecosystem. This was actually extremely beneficial, because it was bringing direct revenues for them and direct services. So there was no request. Following COVID, there was no request from beneficiaries to kind of shift the type of activities of the project to other things to meet the emergencies of their situation. A third thing is the need, as I mentioned before, the duty of care is a need to protect our partners and beneficiaries So here we carried out some communication campaigns on protective measures, particularly hand washing solutions, and we installed in the places where we had projects, we installed some locally made solutions for hand washing, and more than 1,000 of that in different places where we were working. And of course, we had to adjust some of our activities modalities. So for example, when you carry out consultations, well, of course, you can consult as many people as before in the same time, in the same room, same for trainings. For evaluation, where you need to bring in international expertise, we were figuring out ways to carry out evaluation by mixing international expertise that would basically work home-based with local consultants that would do the field work and observation on their side, etc. So we have basically to adjust the modality of our actions, but that, I would say, that went pretty well. So eventually, the implication of this COVID-19 was actually requesting heavy dialogue and precautionary measures, but we had no significant redirection of project activities and budgets. Basically, I would say in a normal project, we basically had 5% of the budget of the project that need to be like shifted or reallocated to precautionary measures, communication campaigns, and to extra costs due to methodologies that were changing. The key factor of success for that was this model of operations and working through local partners, and this is an important lesson. However, I just want to add this, what we have in this blue box on the right side, which is actually a very, very serious impact that we had on another type of project, which is not assistance and advisory projects, which is about, a type of project that was heavily depending on supply chains, and it was an infrastructure project. So one of our projects was actually about building renewable energy, a renewable power plant, and distribute the energy, so through solar panel, so to redistribute it to through a local cooperative of members, of beneficiaries, and redistribute that to an off-grid system to more than 2,000 households in a very remote area of Haiti. Great, except that this project heavily depends on importing material, so for a power plant, for the grid, etc. So to import this material from China and for France. We got 18 months of delay through because of COVID-19 on that. And this has been totally disruptive of the project. What we had to do, basically, keep a close dialogue with the donors and with the partners, organize a project extension. We've been lucky enough that our donor, which was Norway in this case, has been extremely understanding and accepted to top up the project and provide us additional time. But this, you need to build this dialogue and this trust with the partners so that can happen. And the dialogue is also with the partner and with the beneficiaries on the ground, because of course this creates a lot of frustrations locally, because people would expect to get energy supply, within basically 3 months, and 1 year later they still don't have it, or they still have it in very partial way. The model of the power plant is still not fine. It's still not break-even, because the part of the renewable energy is still very low, because you don't have your batteries, so you don't have the ability to kind of adjust your mix of energy, etc. So this is a type of situation you need. So you have to invest a lot of time in this dialogue with the beneficiaries and partners. You also need to redirect resources, update your result framework, and prioritize. And this, I must say, has been a very frustrating experience for me, because in this type of infrastructure project, one of the real added value is also, the type of technical assistance that you bring around that. So, for example, to monitor what are the benefits that you create with this sustainable energy? What are the benefits that you generate for the local communities? And here, basically, we had to cut on all these more analytical aspects of the work to basically focus on getting this power plant in place, and this is extremely frustrating, but it's also part of the work, like when you have to prioritize and to really make sure that you stick to the very key deliverables that you expect. I need commitment to impact, creativity, and making the most of administrative framework. And here I must say we have to play obviously within the rules, and at the end of the day, you always have you're always going to have auditors that are going to come to you, and administrative professionals that are looking after what you're doing and that make sure that you play by the rule. But anyways, these rules, sometimes you have to really push them to the limits to make sure that you can deliver. And in this case, in particular, I must say that we have to find solutions with our implementing partners, and particularly in this case, we've been working with our UNOPS colleagues. So how do you organize solutions by partnering with some organization, in this case like UNOPS, who have much more ability and administrative, I would say, space to handle the type of risk on how you manage your expenses, your commitment, etc., so that you can really get where you want. And to give you just a glimpse of what I mean here, the project has been closed since the end of June last year. So June 2021, we eventually closed the project, the operations of the project. And the power plant was eventually completed only last month. So we spent more than 8 months with the project officially closed, because we had no other administrative solutions, but finding ways through our partners to actually postpone the delivery of some of the activities until we got the final experts that would come to fine-tune the system, etc., in February. So this is the type of thing that you can sometimes need creativity to work on the administrative framework and your set of partners to try to find solutions to make it work. But here you need to be committed. So at some point, it's kind of, you can't just leave it there and say, okay, well, eventually we won't have the power plant. No, I mean, we worked for 3 years, we invested these millions of dollars, we need this power plant to be made. And here you have to be driven by this commitment to impact, I would say. And maybe let's switch to the third situation. So next slide, which was the earthquake. And this was obviously the type of crisis that you don't expect, though it's still possible. Natural disaster are always possible. This time for us, it's been an earthquake. August 14th, here we got a very serious earthquake, 7.2 on the Richter scale, more than 2,200 casualties, and like about 1.6 billion loss and 7,000 hectares of landslides. Just to give you a few figures to picture the earthquake. We got 2 levels of responses, one which is at individual level. I would like to say a bit more on that, but I'm running short in time. But again, the psychological aspects of navigating this crisis. When you got a shock like that, I mean, your guys in your team are under stress, and you need to listen to them and what they need to do as a spontaneous response with their community. So in the first few hours of the earthquake, I got a lot of my team. So of course you reach out to everyone, try to make sure everyone is safe. This was done pretty quickly. In the case of UNEP, we had staff in the area where the earthquake hit. Personally, I was in Port-au-Prince. That was seriously shaken, but not, with no loss in buildings and lives. But we had staff on the spot. And so the first thing is you need to listen to them as well on what they need to do. So it's not so much like you have a kind of plan of activities that is set in advance, but you have to listen. So when they start, I mean, the first hours, basically they start to reach out to their own local communities and try to help. So basically you always have in your surroundings some people who suffer more than you, and here you try to support that. So you need to give this space for your staff to find their own actions that are most of the time spontaneous, that will make them feel relieved and feel themselves useful and feel as them part of their community that is under massive stress. That is important. A second layer is, of course, at a project level. So you need to review the impact that the earthquake had on your projects and your partners. Check out their needs and see if you need to, again, to redirect some aspects, some budgets or activities of the projects. Institutionally, we managed to get the support from a joint emergency unit that we have between OCHA and UNEP, and we contributed to the Center for Emergency of Operation that prevents at national level. And this has been extremely interesting, not only because as UNEP, we felt useful in a situation where we're not tailored to answers to emergency like this on a broader scale, more to focus on the environmental aspects of the crisis. But due to the fact that we were present on the field with people, with staff on the field, and history of collaboration with local authorities, we were actually involved right away into the emergency response. And this has been, even though it's not necessarily our core capacities, this has proved to be helpful for the authorities. So we basically supported with coordinating, data collection, reviewing the impact, assessing the impact, assessing what are the most kind of priority areas to reconnect to the assistant, etc. And this has proven extremely positive in many ways. This is basically the emergency response. And then you have the post-disaster needs assessment, where we played an important role in coordinating partners on all the environmental sector in support to the government leadership. So basically, after a couple of weeks, you have a formal process that is established on what are the needs. You assess the impacts, you assess the needs, you plan for the reconstruction, and you go to a kind of roundtable with donors to try and say, okay, these are the needs. In our case, about $2 billion of needs, out of which we got about $80 million that was specific environmental needs for the environmental sector. Sorry, and here is about basically building all this assessment, and we played an active role in that, and that was again part of feeling useful in that sense. Here in this case, you have to leverage a lot of partnerships to produce data. So we got support from the CNES and the NASA and many others on producing some source of data, and then you need to put all that together. So that's the type of thing obviously unexpected before the earthquake, but you kind of figure out on the way. I had no particular experience on handling this type of situation. And here's where, for example, mobilizing in-house expertise and collaboration is also extremely useful. So in my case, I could build on the expertise we have at the Disaster and Conflict branch within UNEP, which has been actually instrumental, and including to provide targeted expertise. So for example, one of the major impacts we had, like a short-term impact we had to handle on an environmental aspect, was the debris. Basically all the, we got more than tens of thousands of buildings that collapsed. So you have basically to take them down completely and remove the debris to build back. But like how do you handle that? What do you do with the debris, etc.? I had personally no experience on that, no expertise on that, and neither anyone in my team. So here is where you need to quickly be able to build on your in-house expertise. And in this case, we managed to get some experts within UNEP who had this experience in other places and could provide support. So this is also extremely useful and important. Last point I wanted to signal here is to be aware of the broader balance of power to push till the end. So as long as you work within the Ministry of Environment and the partners on environment, we worked a lot with the World Bank and the European Union in particular on this assessment of the needs for the environment and designing the work plan for the environment. Well, as long as you stay within this community, it's pretty straightforward. But then when you put that into the broader reconstruction endeavor and working with Ministry of Planning and there's a full government and full partners, coordination, then you got this balance of powers. And then, for example, in our case, environment is rarely a top priority in these situations. And so here you get to keep fighting to demonstrate the value of investing into the environmental aspect.
Sorry, Fabien, can you hear me? Could you try to wrap up and end in the next minutes due to time constraints?
Come back, sorry for that. So maybe the last slides, I'm super long already, I'm sorry.
Yes, please, if you could end in a few minutes, that would be great,
yeah,
so that we have some minutes for the Q&A.
Yes. So basically some food for thought. You will have the slide. I'm sorry about that, lacking time. Yeah, maybe I don't go further into that. This was basically just highlighting a few key aspects of what I mentioned from this boots on the ground experience of managing crisis. Maybe one single thing I want to highlight here is disruption is the only permanence. I mean, that's unfortunately my experience in Haiti since September 2019, and also turn challenges into opportunities, because in all these situations there's always way to basically support further your agenda. In my case, to promote nature-based solutions. And this, okay, I don't have the time to get into more details, but that's also something you can keep in mind in this situation. Thank you very much, and sorry about the time.
Thanks a lot, Fabien Monteil, for this very interesting presentation. I didn't want to stop you earlier because, yeah, it was so interesting. Now I would give Joe the floor and give him like 10 minutes to finish his presentation, and then we have 10 minutes left for the Q&A session. I hope that's okay for everyone. So, Joe, I give you the floor again.
Yeah, I'll try and run through it. But if you could get the slide deck.
Yes, Mateusz, could you start the slides again?
Go to slide 12. Go to number 12. So I think from my perspective, Fabien has just really brought to life what we're trying to say. Actually, go to the one above. Sorry, one below. Go back to that one, go down. So just stay there. So yes, he really brings to life what we're trying to do. And I'm going to repeat some of the terminology he uses here, because as you recall, my project, my component here was also about the theory behind this. So when the crisis hits, and you are the project manager and the holder of the core information, as it says in the blue box, but you're not necessarily the decision maker. And it's important then to start to understand how decisions are going to get made. But on the immediate response, and then looking back at Fabien's own presentations there, looking at the focus on the areas that have previously been identified as the high risk or high vulnerability, because that's where the real impact is going to be felt on those sensitive parts of the project. And then Fabien talked about contingency plans. Do you have one in place? If you haven't, then you should think about getting one in place, and the options that that presents. And then how does your team recover quickly? And how does your team what does your team need to do to temporarily fix the problems or challenges that have been created? And then I think this is really important. Fabien brought it up as well. The permanent changes. Are there any permanent changes that are needed to the project? Move on. Next slide, please. So this is a quick acronym, this ARCPay, which is about really getting it into a listing of what activities needs to happen. So assessing the impact to the project. And what does that mean? It's like looking at the budget, it's looking at the project constraints, looking at the timeline. Revise the high risk or sensitivity classifications, because it may well be that new sensitivities have been identified. And as Fabien says, the team on the ground, the local team, will be feeding this information back, and it allows you to respond to that. Communicate, don't go really into high level communication, keep it really brief. Situation reports. You've seen the problems I've had with the internet setting here, and this is in a safe location in London, and it's just important that we get the messaging clear and simple. The planning about what you do, just develop simple checklists and put to one side the extensive plans that have been created for the project, evaluate the risks and issues, and then assign tasks to people based on the location, experience, and awareness of their health and safety. And Fabien really brought that to life about how we need to really respond to people's own pressures and their psychological and physical well-being. Next slide, please, before we ask them to do things. So this is now we're looking at weeks into the projects. That previous slide was about days. So the job now is to get the project on track. You've done your crisis management. You've looked at the impacts to the project and project plan and the timelines. And now you're looking at the project scope and seeing whether it needs to be changed permanently. And by permanently, I mean, and again, Fabien mentioned this about putting applications in for additional funding, going to new donors, looking at the stakeholder engagement plan and finding out whether there's new stakeholders that should be brought into the project to enable you to facilitate change. In many of the projects I've worked on, donors have come to us and said, you're in country, can you please deliver this on our behalf? And so the project scope then has to be expanded to include the new requests. And that brings with it a whole set of change criteria. So if looking at getting the project back on track, you look at the core documentation, the proposal, the budget and the scope and the risks, and then you look at the change, how you communicate that change to the team. If you have a log frame, a logical framework, go back and review it and then remap the project plan, that piece of information, that one core piece of information that holds all of that change, all of the original information and the change perspectives, the change communications, and then replace and refresh resources, especially people. Fabien, again, you know, this comment about people burning out, they do burn out, and they burn out really quickly when there's a crisis, and you're asking them to work double shifts and double time, and they're concerned about their own welfare. Next slide, please. And then long term, and this is really important, and it's something that we always all need to take into account, that and you're looking at months here. So the new core documentation reflects the new normality. There's a new communication plan. Everybody knows what's going on. Nobody's in the dark. You have a stabilizing influence, and your project itself might be the stabilizing influence. And I think Haiti is a very good example of where the UN have position themselves to be a stabilizing influence. They tried to do that in most places, but in Haiti, I think it's been quite effective. And then increased resilience. And this is something that Fabien mentioned a lot of, resilience. And I just want you to look at the next slide, because I'm just going to give it 30 seconds of how important resilience is. And you may not be familiar with this, and I think you should try and accommodate this into your project thinking, but there's the one definition of resilience, which is ability to prepare and plan for, absorb, recover from, and more successfully adapt to adverse events. And this simple little flow diagram comes from the Department for International Development, the UK, which has changed its name. But you're looking there at the column number 2 is where the shock comes. Column number 1 is the existing system. And then these 3 green boxes are what you were reviewing about your ability to deal with a shock. So your exposure to the shock, the sensitivity, and your adaptive capacity. And what we're ideally looking for is that you've got all of your preparation in place, and all of your absorbing capacity allows you to bounce back better, which is that top row of the 4th column. And that embraces what they call transformative capacity, which means that you are becoming something new. And that's the whole purpose of learning from shocks, is that you can become something that's much more resilient and new. Thank you. I managed to get that out without any breakdown in internet coverage. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joe. Yeah, wonderful that it worked out. So then I would say we go over to the last part of our training session, which is the Q&A session. So I hand over to my colleague, Ariella. We can't hear you, Ariella. Now we can hear you a bit.
Okay, so I was saying hello to everyone, and what a fantastic presentation in spite of all the technical difficulties we experienced. So far, we have a few questions from the audience. For this one, the first one, which was geared towards Joe, this comes from Tanya. She asked, how do you do the risk scoring? What criteria is being used for scoring them?
There's different techniques for doing it, but you're effectively looking at the risk that's presented, and you score it numerically, and then it's based on the number. And the risk is so you go 1 to 5, 5 being top and 1 being the bottom, and it's the risk of the probability, the magnitude and the probability. So the risk of it actually happening and what the impact of that event will be if it does happen. And that's why it's scaled of 1 not significant to 5 significant, and it's literally a numerical score. And then you assign it based on a matrix of if you score 20, that means it becomes a high risk. If you score 5, it's a low risk. It's all written in literature, it's quite well explained, so it's worth just having a quick look. Just Google it.
Right, and for our second question for you, Joe, is from Hari Krishna. Is there any high-level classification of risks to make sure we are covered risks from all aspects?
No, there's no high-level classification. Risk is very, very specific to the organization and the project that you're working on. So different risks carry different sensitivities. So if you're working on a project that's in a conflict zone, the risk of conflict is high. If you're working in a zone that's away from the conflict, the risk of conflict goes low. So the terminology that you use, the classification of risk, has to be related to your project sensitivities.
Right. So we also have some questions addressed to Fabien, which was a very interesting hands-on perspective of your presentation. So the first one is from Sandesh. Are there any standard tools, frameworks for risk mapping and vulnerability assessment in emergency situations, or is it too contextual, too standardized? Which I think is a bit related to the previous question.
Yep. Actually, on the standards, maybe Joe would know more. Here, my practice is actually a bit more lazy, which is I've been working on quite a lot of projects before, including projects where I found the risk framing being quite robust. And basically what I tend to do when I turn to a new project, I tend to take this old project and screen the listing of the risk, and of course then contextualized. Now, this is obvious, but to make sure that I got this screening of all the types of risk and implications, etc. Usually I use previous works that I worked on, so that might be the best answer. But maybe Joe would have more resources on that. I just want to get to the last point, which is basically, is that too contextual, etc., or can that be comprehensive enough? I just wanted to report a discussion and an experience I had yesterday discussing with colleagues from WFP on a project they have on resilience. They had some activities on resilience in an area that was under heavy risk of flooding. Okay, they had a massive flooding event 2 years ago. They assess the impacts, all the risk, including, the intensity of the flow, the volume of waters they had to manage, etc. They analyzed all that. They designed a project to build resilience, including through, planting, building infrastructure, etc. Eventually, 2 months ago, there's been a massive flooding in the area, more intense than 2 years before. And basically all the work that WFP has been doing was flushed away. Okay. And here, one of the key elements of analysis that we had is that the local experience was to say, well, there's something that happened during these 2 years. We've been uphill, we've been deforesting these areas because of the needs for local people to do charcoals, get money, etc. Well, actually, this is the kind of situation we face in many parts of the world. Well, actually, they've been doing that. So the first element is you got a more intense crisis than first assessed. Okay, and the second thing is you got increasing factors of risk that were processed during the project implementation. And here is something where we discuss and say, well, actually, you need to have this kind of landscape risk analysis, and to really assess your risk in a broader way than where are your areas of action. but also more broadly at the landscape level to say, are you increasing your vulnerability in this landscape because of other activities that are happening aside your thing? And here you have a very critical example of some things like, I mean, at your project level, it's really difficult, it's really challenging to be able to assess the full spectrum of risk that can, that can really eventually hit your project.
Okay, I'm not sure if Joe, if you have anything to add to Fabien's explanation.
No, he's absolutely right. And I think the looking at different screening, when I was looking for an example to put into this presentation, I went back through some of the old risk assessments that I've done and tried to find one that was fit for purpose. And it is a question of learning. It's a technique that you pick up, that you recognize a really good risk assessment and you take it with you. And I think the project components there that Fabien's talking about is also relevant in terms of the concept of resilience, about building resilience. And the whole essence of resilience is about understanding the scale of the shock that's going to come and then building yourself around that shock. Doing a risk assessment should not be a single item. It should be collaborative and it should take time. And there are indirect risks and direct risks, and there are manageable risks and non-manageable risks. And it should really be a long day event with post-it notes and all manner of interactions and scenario planning as well.
Okay, and as I look to the other questions, I see that Surab has a very related and timely question. And he asked, I guess, for everyone, do you analyze the external risk from various stakeholders in different, especially conflict and disaster situations?
I think Fabien's best placed to answer that one.
Yeah, okay, on this one, actually, it's an excellent question. I would say in practice, yes and no. I mean, my experience is basically yes and no. You do it because you have to do it, and luckily enough, we have experience that is translated into a methodology and procedures that we have to respect, and that take us to get this external risk analysis to be done. Now in practice, and one of the key challenges you have in the kind of real life situation is you have 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, and you have limited resources, whether in terms of capacity to work, but also expertise. Like you're not necessarily an expert on every sorts of risk and typologies of risk. You don't have that in your team. As Joe mentioned, this is super important. This is like a gradual process, and this is collaborative process, and it has to be like systematically carried out. So there's one point where you need to have a deliverable, which is your risk matrix. And there's the ongoing activities of dialogue with your partner, etc., to kind of reassess this permanently. I would say this is my kind of real life experience. This process is never perfect because you're also under resource pressure. But I mean, you should definitely be able to carry this out as much as possible. Yeah. I hope I got the questions right.
Apparently risk is a very hot topic because we have another one coming in from your name is alphanumeric, so I don't know. It says, at what level risk we have to stop or cancel the execution of the project?
There isn't a level. You set the level when you're designing the project boundaries. The level could be 10 deaths. It could be no deaths. It could be a loss of $50,000. I've worked on projects where we've had very low levels of risk because it's just not acceptable to the stakeholders, to those who are going to take over the project operationally. And then other projects working with less risk averse organizations where it seems to be very, very liberal in terms of what risk we can accept. Fabien, what do you think?
I mean, totally. It's an interesting question because when you work again on the spot, you don't necessarily ask yourself generic questions like, what is my level of risk, etc. You basically I mean, you work as hard as you can until you reach the wall, I would say, which is probably not the right way to go, but actually in practice, that's most of the time, that's how you work. I want to flag here that, for example, what we managed to do in our business continuity plan, because of, again, I mean, Joe, you mentioned that pretty well. I mean, there are different types of projects and different type of exposure that you have. And in our case, for example, I mean, we managed to keep working and to keep our activities under deployment actually at a pretty steady rate. And we have actually most of our project, we didn't even ask for an extension of the project time frame, because we delivered on time, despite all the crises I mentioned to you. We managed to do that in particular because in our business continuity plan, we tried mainly to look at how far we can go into finding solutions to keep working, even where, you know, at some point we are under crisis. In 2020, because of this conjunction of COVID-19 and all the social economic crisis, social political crisis, I had to be out, and all the internationals of the team of UNEP and, you know, most of the other UN agencies, we had to be out of the country for, in my case, for 5 months. But through the business continuity plan, we managed to basically stay on board with everyone, whether they're national, they're international, whether they stay at the capital city or on the field. We managed to get everyone on board and keep working on that. So, you know, in a situation where even some other agencies or some organization would be out of the country and wouldn't be able to keep working, actually we managed, even if, you know, UNEP is not necessarily designed for that, but we managed to keep the work ongoing because of the solutions that we found. So again, my answer is not necessarily ideal, but I would say it's really contextual. But try, I mean, the first thing you do when you're a manager is you try to go as far as you can into first ensuring security, of course, but also trying to find solutions to get your activities ongoing. And I guess at the point where you can't do that anymore, this you have to stop. But I would say there is probably no one size fit them all kind of solutions for that or answers for this question. It's really contextual.
I think risk, when you're looking at risks, it should be risks across the board. It should be social risks, political risks, financial risks, environmental risks, technological risks. And there's an acronym, PESTLE, PESTLE, that people use when they're doing management planning, that allows you to at least start to categorize what risks you should, or the categories of risks you should be looking at.
Okay, I think this is all the questions that we have. Given the time, I apologize to all the participants. I think there are still a few more pending questions, but it will take us over the time. And so I would just like to wrap up. Thank you, Joe and Fabien, for your fantastic presentation, particularly Joe, for your perseverance in your technical difficulties and for providing the framework, and Fabien, also for your fantastic on-the-ground experience, especially in such a particularly difficult situation. I'm sure we should have you on again just to get more real-life case examples and scenarios that you face and can be a learning tool for everyone. I would also like to thank Eike and Paula for doing this whole program, and Eike for doing the moderation. And I would just like to remind everyone that we have our final lecture webinar in this series on the March 30th on project management and monitoring. So we hope to see you again. And please don't forget to do the pre and post survey in order to get the certification. And as mentioned before, all the recording and the slides will be made available. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone. And I hope everyone has a beautiful evening, morning, day, wherever you are, and week.
Thank you very much.